So we're going to just talk for about 20 minutes and then just open it up for questions, because I know a lot of people have a bunch of them. So I was a little bit, I was interested by your background. You finished your bachelor's degree at Wharton, and then you stayed on an additional year and got a physics degree. Yeah. When I imagine almost all of your classmates went to Wall Street. So that must have been a pretty tough year. Did you have a vision at this point for what you ultimately wanted to achieve?
Well, there were three things in college that I thought would most affect the world, and they were the internet, sustainable energy, and space exploration. I didn't think I'd be involved in all three of those, but as it turns out, as a result of some success in the internet arena, I was able to get involved in rockets and cars, which are pretty capital intensive. But after sort of finishing the Wharton undergrad, I decided I didn't want to work on Wall Street or work for McKinsey or something like that, which everybody else wanted to do. And I'd taken enough sort of physics electives so that I could just spend another year and finish a physics degree, and then head to California to do grad studies at Stanford in material science and applied physics, working on high energy density capacitors for electric vehicles. And then I ended up putting that on hold really dropping out.
You're going back?
Technically, I'm still on deferment. Yeah. Dean says I can come back anytime. But that's unlikely. So,
with that Stanford degree, you might really do something with your life.
Exactly. So did a couple of internet companies, and then kind of circled back to electric cars and then rockets.
Yeah, it's a typical story.
Right.
Yeah. So, it seems like a long time ago now, but I think probably your entire background is very interesting. For us, we're an internet company at our core as well, and we came up really during the same period of time as PayPal. To me, one of the really interesting things about you, and that is very similar to some of the history of our company, is that you have been very willing to put your own capital and your own money into your business. And one of the most intriguing times for you was 2008 with Tesla. And you went in, and you were not originally the CEO. You were the funding. You were the funder and the chairman, but then you were also you were a developer. So, talk a little bit about that time and what it was like to have basically everything on the line.
That was super unpleasant. That's for sure. Basically 2007, 2008, and 2009 sucked. They were really horrible.
It was awesome here in Washington.
So my thought with what I had originally hoped with Tesla, was that I wouldn't that I could just dedicate enough time to do product development, but then not actually run the company. So that turned out to be a false assumption. And I was sort of faced with the choice of, in 2008, of either run the company and just work a lot more, or it would die, mostly, So, in 2008 was particularly tough on a number of fronts, because the third launch of the Falcon 1 rocket for SpaceX failed. The Tesla financing round fell apart because people kept telling us that the term sheet was just around the corner. They just want to see what the market's going to do. I'm like,
it was great. Yeah,
right.
We were doing the same thing.
Right. Yeah. So Tesla desperately needed money, and then SolarCity had a deal with Morgan Stanley, solar lease finance deal that Morgan Stanley themselves could not honor because they just didn't have money. And then I was also getting divorced. So that was like just shit on every level. Utter misery. And then fortunately, things perked up towards the end of the year. The fourth launch of Falcon 1 did work. SolarCity was able to get through that period by just selling solar systems instead of leasing them. It was very tough. Tesla Tesla was probably the most difficult in that time because, obviously General Motors and Chrysler were busy getting bankrupt. And trying to raise money. Can you imagine trying to raise money for a car company in late 2008 while General Motors and Chrysler are going bankrupt, and they're like asking for examples of prior successful car companies, and the last examples are at least 50, they're not in living memory, So
there's that Tucker guy. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, they think of Tucker and DeLorean, It's like if I had $1 for every time somebody mentioned DeLorean, I wouldn't need to have an IPO. That was very difficult. In fact, the only way we could raise money was internally, so from existing investors, and then I had to commit all of my available capital to Tesla in order to get the other investors to do the other half of the round, and that was enough to get Tesla through that point. And then a lot of people assume that the DOE saved our butt, but actually it was Daimler. So that in early 2009, Daimler invested $50 million into Tesla, which was extremely important. Tesla didn't actually get any DOE money until 2010. So if
and that was a loan, correct? Is that
correct?
The structure,
a loan, and it's a staggered loan. It's actually what it is as we incur expenses, those expenses are then audited by PwC, and the portion that is applicable to the Model S and to powertrain deals or powertrain supply to other companies, like the powertrain supply deal we have to Daimler or Toyota, that portion is then reimbursed about a month or two later. Because we also got some bullshit press about like, oh, the DOE's giving us money for the Roadster, and it's like, no, it's like literally impossible for them to do that. I made the mistake of calling the New York Times reporter who knowingly falsely reported that a douchebag. Now, if somebody knowingly falsely reports something,
look, the truth hurts.
Are they not
right?
a douchebag?
Well, I'm going to ask you we'll go from dark to light. Here's a question I really never thought that I'd ask someone. What was it like to have a rocket fail? I mean,
yeah, it sucks. It's really terrible.
It was, but it looked kind of cool. I mean,
it did look kind of cool.
It did look kind of cool.
Just between you and me. Well, so the first one.
But I mean, I guess a serious question. I mean, you had to expect that there was a very high likelihood that the rocket was, that there were kind of a lot of things that could go wrong.
Yes. At the start of SpaceX, I thought the chance of success of the company was less than 50%.
How are we doing now?
Oh, I'd say, 99% at this point, because SpaceX has been profitable for 4 years and will be profitable this year as $3 billion of contracts under revenue, $3 billion in revenue under contract. Like even if we didn't sell any more launches, we'd be profitable for the next several years.
You have the NASA contract, correct?
Yeah, the NASA is the biggest contract, but SpaceX has over 30 launches. 13 of those are for NASA. So about 40% of our business is with NASA. But if you look at the government spending as a percentage of the economy, it's about 40%. So even if you sold pencils, about 40% of your business would be with the government.
I've lost my. And then what it was like when the fourth rocket went up and it was a successful launch, that had to be kind of cool too.
Yeah, that was awesome. It was actually more just relief. I didn't feel elation. I just felt like extreme stress relief. Yeah, I actually was disappointed that I didn't feel happier. I just felt like slightly less stressed.
Just on to the next thing. Yeah.
The fourth launch just meant that we wouldn't die quite then. But
that's good news.
Right. But then we were awarded a big NASA contract at the end of literally, I think it was December 23rd. In fact, the absolute low point was I think December 22nd or 21st of 2008, because even though we'd had that Falcon 1 success, we still had very few contracts, and we didn't have enough money to keep the company going. We really needed a big contract win, And then NASA called and said that they'd awarded us the main contract for replacing the cargo transport function of the space shuttle. And it was 1.6 billion. So I said, I love you guys. I don't know if you're supposed to say that, but
That's right. Yeah, that was billion with a B, right?
right. I love you. Yes, lost all decorum.
Yeah. I think that one of the interesting things, taking quotes from you, is that your cost is about 1/3. I believe that's right of the competitors for rocket launches. Are you? Are there things that you think that NASA could learn from private companies that are coming into the market now?
Yeah, I think in general it's tough for government to do things efficiently. So I generally I think that government should do try to minimize the number of things that government does. So I'm generally a proponent of smaller government, not bigger government, just because government as a system is not an efficient system. So you want to minimize the government participation in the economy. That doesn't mean getting rid of it, but it's just saying you have to think really carefully before government does something versus free enterprise does something. Free enterprise is always going to be more efficient. So now there are things like basic physics research, and obviously I think we'd rather have a government army than a private army, and I think probably a government justice system than a private justice system. There's sort of things that the government should do, and also kind of doing things like the Hubble and the Mars rovers. Something like the Hubble is a small amount of good for everyone. It's like, whoa, we learned more about the universe, got some really cool pictures, and that's of value to all of America and all of humanity, really. But it's hard to say who's going to pay for it if you try to raise private funds for it. Yeah. You might be able to get it, but it's harder.
So you got your money back from the last thing, right? So
which one?
You got your money back from having invested in Tesla, and you just got the contract from NASA. So
yeah, actually, as it turns out, Tesla and SpaceX and SolarCity are doing really well, and at I think it's if you look at say the Tesla stock price, it's actually been remarkably stable. It's been sort of in the 20s for a year, despite massive gyrations in the market. And there was a momentary short squeeze in December of last year, which there's a bunch of articles that reference, Tesla had this high of $36. Yeah, that's only because there was a short squeeze at the end of December. It was because at the end of that was when the 6-month lockup period for the IPO expired, and I think people in the market expected that there would be a lot of people selling stock at that point, and actually they weren't.
It just didn't happen.
Right. So it was a big short squeeze that took place. I think there's probably going to be another short squeeze on Tesla, because I periodically get these Google alerts that we're the third most shorted stock on the NASDAQ.
21 million shares short now.
Somebody's got a lot of balls.
Yeah, well, so what? all right.
They could get shaved.
What do they have wrong? What? Okay, so that guy, he's short your shares. So talk to Dave Meyer. You tell him why he's wrong.
Dude, it's going to sting. That's all I can tell you. It's yeah, I think, well, I don't know if you actually are shorting your shares or not. Okay, but I think generally when I talk to people who short the shares, that they're not shorting it because of anything they know about Tesla. They're just shorting it because of historical precedent. It's there hasn't been a successful car company in ages, so Tesla's going to be is not going to succeed. Well, how about looking at the fundamentals? So the thing is that whenever there's a big change in technology, whenever there's a big technology discontinuity, that's when opportunity arises in industry. And if you look at, say, like the computer industry, where you had IBM was extremely dominant in mainframes, and everyone thought, they'll just be extremely dominant in PCs and everything, and they weren't. they have a hard time with the technology. When there's a sharp change in technology, gradual changes they can deal with, but sharp changes they tend to not do well with. And you can look at the internet and say, well, why wasn't Microsoft the leader in search? Why didn't they beat Google? Why didn't Google beat Facebook? Yeah. It's just tough to deal with big technology change. And what we're seeing in the automotive industry is the biggest technology change since the moving production line. The entire powertrain is changing. Yeah. So, and then people say, well, how could you possibly compete with the big car companies like Toyota? Oh, you mean Toyota? Our partner, the one that we're providing electric powertrains to? Would that be the Toyota you're referring to? You have to say, well, why is Toyota having Tesla supply electric powertrains? It can't be that easy if we're doing that. Why is Daimler, the company that invented internal combustion engines, having us supply components to them? It's because it's really hard technology. Tesla is really we're a hardcore technology and design company. I think there's other companies out there that are sort of different, and I think Fisker is pretty different from us. They're not a hardcore engineering company, but we are, and so I think, come what may, there's huge value in Tesla in terms of the intellectual property that we've developed. And if you look at some of our strategic investors like Daimler and like Toyota and like Panasonic, who have not sold a share. In fact, Daimler at the last, when we did a secondary earlier this year, Daimler participated full pro rata in that secondary. It's difficult to ask for a better endorsement than that. Yeah.
I think that the powertrain contract that you all signed with Toyota was very interesting for one reason. It seems to me, I couldn't think of another instance where a car company had outsourced such a central component. Usually they do a lot of manufacturing, but that's a central component. So yeah. That feels like not just a game changer for you, but a game changer for the industry.
Yeah, you're right. It is unusual for that to occur, and part of what Akio Toyoda is trying to do with his company is try to push it to be more entrepreneurial. He remembers the days of his grandfather when it was very entrepreneurial. Toyota made sewing machines in the 30s, and then they just decided one day they're going to make cars, and people were like, they couldn't possibly make a car that anyone would want to buy, and they made a great car. But they were very entrepreneurial, and Akio Toyoda is concerned that they've become too set in their ways. They've become too convinced in their own rightness. Yeah. And that's part of what led to some of the issues that he came in to fix. And Akio Toyoda is a really great guy, by the way. Toyota is really fortunate to have him at the helm there. But he wants to push his team to try new things, because when he went to his team and said, hey, what about electric vehicles? They said it couldn't be done. Right. And so it's like, okay, so let's see if this little company, Tesla, can do it. And we're doing it. And they're like, ooh, okay, I guess it can be done.
Why don't you think they could do it? I mean, they tried for a long time. They put millions of dollars into developing the technology. What's different?
Well, no, I think they will be able to do it over time. But it's just not very quick. They didn't. The mindset of trying something new and radical was just not there. There's people have written books about this, like Crossing the Chasm and Innovator's Dilemma and all that, about how it's difficult to do radical innovation at a big company, because if you try to do radical innovation and you fail, you get a huge ding. Yeah. And
especially if you have something to protect to start with.
Yeah. Right. Exactly. You've got to decide that you're going to cannibalize your existing business and take a big risk and deal with all the issues that inevitably arise when you're trying to push a new technology, and not get fired along the way. It's pretty hard. Yeah.
One of your passions has been clean energy, and this has been something that you've done, I guess, on the side of the other these other very small projects. Do you believe that the developing markets like India and China, how are they going to develop in a way that sustainable and clean energy is possible?
Well, China is actually already moving to towards clean energy very aggressively. People, there's a lot of press about Solyndra and the DOE giving Solyndra $400 million and Solyndra failed, and should the government really have given them $400 million? And it's worth pointing out that they got about $800 million from private investors, primarily Silicon Valley venture capitalists, including some very big names. So they weren't suckers who got that money. The fundamental issue with Solyndra was they would have been okay at about $2 a watt for solar, but the Chinese pushed it down to $1 a watt.
Yeah, the prices collapsed, right?
Yeah, and the Chinese government invested $40 billion in their solar industry. And so people were like Solyndra, you suck for failing. I'm like, yeah, they had literally 1% the resources of their competitors. Who would win in that situation? It's pretty hard.
You did.
Well, okay, yeah. But in the case of Solar City, I thought this would occur. I thought there would be a rabid competition in the cost per watt of solar. They're somewhat inevitable with Korea, Japan, China, Germany, all competing like mad on cost per watt, and it's very much a commodity that you do not want to be in that business. And then so Solar City's focus is on balance of system. They're kind of like Dell or Apple. Dell or Apple, they don't make the memory chips or the CPU or the hard drive, but they design the overall system, they put it together, they handle the customer relationship, they own the customer brand, they own the relationship. I mean, if you got Solar City installation at your house, you have no idea what panels you got. I mean, it's like panel. I mean, Solar City panels, you might as well know. People know about as much about what panels are on the roof as they know about what DRAM chips are in their computer. Who made your DRAM chips in your Mac? Apple? No, it was not Apple. In fact, I think that there's a lot of parallels between the DRAM business and the solar panel business. I think it's going to go through the same sort of boom-bust, microscopic margin situation. But the more competition there is in panel cost per watt, the better Solar City does. So they're kicking butt. I mean, they're growing at 50 to 100% a year and positive cash flow.
You have a pretty tight time frame, so I want to make sure that we open it up to questions from the audience, if that's okay. So,
Elon, thank you very much for visiting us today. Just a couple questions. The first is, why are there so many fewer IPOs now than have been the case in years past? And the second question is, having never had the pleasure of working with you or for you, this might actually be a better question for your associates, but I always think of CEOs and leaders as creating cultures around them. Bill's interview very much was focused on exploits, achievements, and forward-looking things for your businesses. What's it like to work with you on a daily basis? What kind of a culture do you typically create around yourself? Are there catchphrases you use, or how do you roll?
Well, I don't normally wear a suit. The reason I'm wearing a suit is because I'm in D.C. And when in Rome. Although you guys aren't wearing suits, but
we roll a little differently.
Right. You're not normal for D.C.
Yeah. Welcome to Virginia.
Right. I just gave a talk at the National Press Club, and I'm headed to the Pentagon right after this. That's why I need to leave on time, because they're quite punctual over there. I don't know. I'm not sure exactly how to describe the culture of SpaceX or Tesla, but I do try to think of it in kind of like signal to noise, where signal is getting useful things done, noise is everything else, and so we want to have people be focused on doing useful things and not involved in sort of internecine politics. I think, the role of the manager is like basically to make sure people are. Well, you need to be able to decide what is the right strategy, what's the direction to go, and then make sure people are doing things that are pointed in that direction, and that their talents, their opportunities are maximized, and just sort of like iterate on that loop. That's kind of how I think. And then I think in terms of recruiting and motivating the best people, having you got to make sure it's a reasonably fun work environment, so people are looking forward to coming to work in the morning. It's a lot easier to be productive and focused about if you're interested in what you're doing, and you're looking forward to it, than if your mind's trying to escape and it feels like prison where you leave at 5 p.m. or something like that. And then the other is that financial reward needs to be commensurate with the effort expended. So if they work really hard, they got to think, okay, the reward will be proportionate to my effort. Obviously, if you have a situation where you see somebody is highly rewarded for doing much less effort than you, then that's demotivating. So you want to avoid situations like that. And then the third thing is, I think if people think that what they're working on there's a greater cause, that there's something that could change the world, then I think that's also a motivating factor. Now, not everything changes the world. I mean, or changes to various degrees. But I think for the most talented and driven people, it's important that there be a larger purpose.
How do you view well-conceived failures in your company?
Well, I think it's important nobody bats 1,000, obviously. And no matter how smart you are, you will make some number of mistakes. Everyone makes mistakes. It's just a question of how many and how often, and do you have a good...
And whether a rocket blows up.
Right. I didn't fire anyone responsible for the particular failures associated with the first three flights, actually. Because they could have made better decisions, but they're smart, hardworking, and it's sort of like, it just wouldn't be fair in that situation. So it's only if somebody is either they can't get themselves motivated around the core mission, or they're really not giving it everything they can. In some cases, they may be not the right fit for a particular role, or there was an error in the hiring process. But other than that, it's pretty forgiving, I think.
Who's next?
Okay, so hi, I've got a question. It's a nice segue to your next appointment at the Pentagon. So I'm interested in what the U.S. military is doing with green energy, how they're going to use it in the future. For them, it's probably a matter of national security. That's very important, but I also care a lot about our planet, and I know you do too. So any comments on upcoming opportunity for either solar or electronic vehicles or anything green
Sure.
with the military?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, the military does have a mandate to move towards sustainable energy, and it does have the dual advantage of being good for the environment and good for national security. I think certainly solar is very important, because a lot of the military bases out there, they operate on generators, and so they're pretty inefficient from an electricity generation standpoint. They're just importing a lot of oil, and it actually takes a lot of oil to get the oil there, so it's really inefficient. So going big on solar is pretty important for the military. And Solar City is actually trying to do that with a big solar installation at military bases. It was announced recently, and it was actually going to be funded in part by the DOE, but then the Solyndra thing kind of threw everything for a loop, and so it doesn't look like that's going to happen, unfortunately. But on the positive news side, the Solar City thinks they can probably get it done without the DOE. So I think, I don't want to jump the gun here, but I think they'll be able to move forward even without the DOE. The cost is going to be a little higher, because the cost of solar is so dependent on the capital cost of the thing, because it doesn't cost anything to run it, really. It's just capital cost. So yeah, I think things are moving in a good direction there. And then over time, I think we'll see military vehicles going increasingly electric. But the military can be a relatively slow adopter, and unless there's like a pressing need, it can be a pretty slow adopter of technology. I mean, some of the planes that are up there flying, pretty ancient. So I think it'll probably take a while for the military will probably not be the first here. Yeah.
More of a whimsical question and a dream of mine. Chances of passenger flights? How soon?
Sure. Well, I think we could do passenger flights. I think maybe best case three years, but probably worst case 5 years. And these will be orbital flights, and depending upon what level of reusability we're able to achieve with the vehicle, that will drive the cost. On a completely expendable basis, I think that the cost per seat would be on the order of $20 million, which is obviously pretty expensive. But that's because you're throwing the rocket away. It's sort of like, imagine how much an air ticket would cost if you had to throw the plane away every time. It's really expensive. 747 is about $300 million. You need two for a round trip, but nobody's paying $500 million for a plane ticket. Or even, whatever it is, 400 passengers times that, so like $1.5 million a ticket. So
They'd do it if they could get away with it.
Well, that's the beauty of competition and everything. But you can use that 747 over and over again, like 10,000 times or more. So the capital cost in your ticket price, the capital cost has to be accounted somehow, but it's a pretty small portion.
So we have time, I think, for maybe two more questions.
Oh, right here. In keeping with the what do you see in the future discussion we've got going, with Tesla, it seems like the auto industry is ripe for disruption as well. How long do you think it'll be till we're all driving Teslas to work? Will it be a generation? Will it be 10 years? When do you think the technology will really be commercially viable for the everyday consumer?
Well, so we're trying to get to mass market electric cars as fast as possible, and if that's really been my goal with Tesla from the beginning, is to make mass market electric cars. But as a small company, we didn't have the economies of scale, and the technology wasn't refined enough to go to mass market right away. So the master plan has always been to start with expensive vehicles in low volume, go to mid-price, mid-volume, and then low-price, high-volume. And so we're about to do step 2 in that strategy, which is mid-price, mid-volume with the Model S, which I'm highly confident will hit the market and get delivered to customers middle of next year. In fact, we've got a big event this weekend, which is the first customer drive, or the first time anyone will drive the Model S Beta, which is essentially indistinguishable from the production car, except for slight bugs and things. And that's a car that starts at $50,000, so it's comparable to Mercedes, BMW, Lexus type of thing. And then hopefully in about 4 years or so, we can get to the sub $30,000 or maybe around $30,000 car. And we have the factory to do it. The great thing about the factory that we acquired from GM and Toyota is that it has about a 500,000 vehicle a year capacity. We're just using a little tiny portion of it. In fact, we've literally turned the lights out and cut off the main breakers in the rest of the building, so not to use base load. But we have this huge asset, which is this factory that we can leverage and scale up at a relatively low capital cost.
And you're a bull on manufacturing domestically?
I really like manufacturing, and I think sometimes manufacturing is looked at as kind of a boring, like you're just making copies or something like that. But there's a huge amount of innovation that occurs in manufacturing, and I think it's actually a really interesting problem. So I'm very pro manufacturing, and I'm very much in favor of thinking manufacturing like a technology problem and not just like you're just going to make copies.
Bending iron.
You're thinking about it like this. If you're trying to take raw materials and get them into the desired shape, if as efficiently as possible, and it's a really interesting puzzle as to how you do that, and there's a huge amount of innovation that can be applied there. Toyota showed this with the Toyota production system, and I think there's even more that can be done in that regard. And but I think you have to have a tight iteration loop between engineering and production in order to experience that in order to apply that innovation. That's why we've got engineering and production closely physically located in Silicon Valley.
I think Jeff,
Yeah.
J Lo.
Hey. Actually, I was curious what you thought of the future of the Vasimir rocket, and does SpaceX have any plans on working with Ad Astra at all?
So the Vasimir is it's basically an in-space propulsion. It's basically an ion drive, and you can't use it to depart from Earth. You can only use it in space because the actual thrust is quite low. That is true for all ion drives. I think it's okay as far as ion drives go. I mean, I think there's some question marks around how much energy is required to operate the Vasimir, and I think that generally sort of presupposes a nuclear reactor and all that sort of stuff. So I think that's a bit tricky, and it's not clear to me that the Vasimir wins when you're looking at basically watts of input energy per newton of thrust, which is sort of the key figure of merit. I do believe in ion drives. I'm saying it's something SpaceX will get into, but I think we'll probably be more in favor of sort of things like Hall effect thrusters and maybe laser accelerated particles or something like that.
So, Elon, I think you can get a sense from our audience that we are enormous fans of purpose-driven entrepreneurship, and you're one of the embodiments of that. And we really appreciate that you took the time to come and speak with us today.
All right.
Thank you.
Thank you.